I pissed on my girlfriend in her sleep, then had sex with her. I've been with my girlfriend Katie for 4 years. We are both college students but at different universities. She took a trip to my school for a week last spring break since we couldn't afford anything else to do. On the last night she was here, we had sex at around 3 a.m. She got up to go to the bathroom afterwards while I was still in bed. I remember waiting for her to come out so I could go to the bathroom too, but I was so tired that I fell asleep before she even got back. Had some weird dream that I can't really remember, but in my dream I went to the bathroom and had the best piss of my life. Woke up around 5 a.m., super confused because I was soaking wet. At first I thought I was sweating like crazy, so I tried to go back to sleep with my legs hanging out of the covers. I woke up again later before Katie did because of this smell. I sit up and just thinking to myself, I can't believe I just pissed all over my bed. I immediately get up and spray air freshener everywhere and open the window. Katie still hasn't woken up yet, so I'm panicking, trying to think of what to say when she wakes up. So I spray my cologne on the bed and myself after I get dressed. The plan was to take her out to eat ASAP and keep her away from my room. I whined in her bag, picked out some clothes for her and then packed all of her stuff as quietly as possible. I was going to try to get everything in her car, but when I opened the door, she woke up. I immediately, probably with too much emphasis, told her to get up and get dressed. Luckily for me, she got up before asking why. Instead of getting dressed, she wanted a round two. Another panic attack later. I said we shouldn't do it here, let's just shower together. She was all for it, so we did, after I get dressed first and rushed to take her bags out of my room so she wouldn't have to go back in. We packed up and went on our date before she left. She never said anything about ever, so I assumed she didn't notice or assumed it was sweat as well. I'm planning on proposing to her in a few months, so I guess the moral of the story is, if you want someone, piss on them in their sleep and then duck them after.
I made fun of a guy for being molested. I'm not saying this next part to make it look like some righteous indignation of justice served crap, because it wasn't. I still feel incredibly bad about what I did. I was being a stupid little angry teenager who really thought she was smart here, and it was wrong. Vincent, of course, he went by Vinny, was my cousin's boyfriend's kid from a previous marriage, and he was in the year above me at school. He was just a real smarmy, bragging, narcissistic, cocky duck. He was known for cheating on his girlfriends, using people for sex, constantly publicly humiliating people, acting up in class, just nasty shit like that. Your average sleazeball. He really liked preening on me in particular, too. I mostly kept to myself, but he made a point of all our conversations, that I didn't want no part of, being about who he'd slept with, how she looked, how great his grades were. Wasn't that test so easy? Some story where he was a cunt or him teasing me. That's it. Most of the time I would just nod along or say I had to go. I didn't even make an effort to get a word in edgeways. I called him an asshole once, and he just sort of laughed like I was joking and moved on. I'm not gonna lie, I was a bit of a coward. I really should have told him to duck off, but I just never did. Anyway, one day I went to see my cousin's new house and the conversation sort of veered to him. I don't remember the exact conversation, but she basically told me his behavior was putting a strain on her and her BF's relationship, and how he needed some kind of help but her boyfriend just wouldn't see it. She mentioned that he was raped and molested repeatedly by a neighbor of her boyfriend when he was a kid, and how her BF didn't find out for years until another kid reported him and the BF questioned Vincent. This is where I was really a nasty smug little bitch. Instead of thinking, oh that's sad, it's probably a coping mechanism for all the horrible shit he's been through, even then I just thought of it as he deserved it for being mean. Revenge ammo. A chink in the armor. So we were on the bus maybe a few weeks later, and he was asking about how many guys I had been with so far. None, at the time, as opposed to him and all his girls that he wouldn't shut up about. He'd asked me this before. We'd had basically the exact same conversation. He said something about how I'd be fine, men have lower standards anyway usually, and then said he was just kidding. We sat in silence for a second. And then me, being the terrible, smug little girl that I was back then, decided to say something along the lines of how many guys have you ducked? Just the one weird old neighbor? He looked really shocked and confused, then really angry, to the point I thought he was gonna hit me for a second. I had really thought it would feel good to say, but it didn't even then. He just said he didn't know what I was on about, then called me a weird bitch, and left. We didn't talk again. My sister broke up with her boyfriend not long after. Sorry, Vincent. I really am. I'd reach out to you, But I wouldn't want to reopen old wounds or anything. Maybe it'd be weird. We were both shitty kids, and I hope you're a better person now.
I pimped out high school girls for 2 years. One of them was my sister. Of all the bad things I did back in my drug-using, partying days, this has to be the worst. When I was in my early 20s, I dated a high school freshman, and whether it was just because of my influence or whether there were other factors in play, I'll never know, but she was a really screwed up girl. I didn't care. Back then all I cared about was coke, ecstasy, partying, and ducking. Mary was into all of that, but there was a problem. We didn't have much money. She was just a kid and I barely made $250 a week at my crappy landscaping job. One day I had her with me while picking up some ecstasy, and the dealer, stoned as duck, told me he'd give us 2 extra pills if she slept with him. It took some convincing, but Mary eventually agreed, and that was the first time I pimped a girl out. She wasn't the only one or the one I most regret. Like I said, Mary was a screwed up girl before I met her. I'm not saying I didn't make things worse for her, but I'm positive what ended up happening to her wasn't entirely my fault. The ones I regret most aren't even the friends she helped me recruit from her school after Mary became a proper prostitute. Most of them were also sort of crazy already, or else Mary wouldn't have been able to convince them to work for me. The one I regret most is my sister. She was 15 the first time she asked me for drugs. Just marijuana, which I had plenty of, but I convinced her it cost 10 times what it did. Keep in mind I was on something practically all the time at this point and had grown used to seeing young women as a means to make cash. I was absolutely without remorse or guilt. So she paid with saved up allowance money, something like $100 for 2 joints. Eventually I brought her to her first rave and even paid for everything, including the ecstasy. While she was rolling hard, I told a friend of mine to massage her, and when she began to complain that he was touching her too much, I told her to stop being a baby and just enjoy it. I watched my sister lose her virginity that night to a guy I barely remember anymore. He paid me $100 later for that. It wasn't long before she became my constant companion at parties, raves, and even clubs. Our parents were trying to control her by grounding her, but I convinced her to sneak out all the time. She and my 2 main girls, including Mary, would go out and get high, and then I'd hook them up with someone. I would take the majority of the money, and they never complained because they were scared of me for a couple reasons. They were scared I might hurt them because, yes, I barely remember doing so, but while cooked out I was known for getting violent. They were also scared whenever I threatened to leave them or cut them off. They saw me do that to a few of their friends and they didn't want that to happen. This went on for 2 years. It ended after my sister was arrested for possession and solicitation. I'd had the bright idea that my girls should be getting their own Johns, so I started bringing them to clubs where I knew the bouncers and send them in to find customers for their services. It worked well for a few short weeks until my sister got caught up in a police raid. They arrested dozens of people that night, my sister included, but she was by far the youngest. After that only Mary remained of my girls. The rest were scared now, and my sister was in a drug treatment center. I tried getting some of them back, even some of the ones I'd gotten rid of before, but I was circling the drain and they seemed to know it. Suddenly I wasn't the cool older guy, I was the loser druggy guy. What finally got me to change was the day I brought Mary over to one of my dealer's friend's place. This friend was supposedly really into young redheads and would pay $300 for some fun with her. My dealer vouched for him, but I brought Mary there myself anyway because I wanted the money. I was back to being broke and I needed cash desperately. So I brought her to this sketchy neighborhood and walked her to the door. Funny thing is, Crazy Mary was for once nervous and suggested we forget about this dude. I insisted though, and by now she always listened to me. When we entered the room I knew something was off. There were 3 guys there and they had flashlights. They said something about the power being off and I stupidly believed them enough to let them lead me into the main room. Mary was freaking out at this point, probably because she realized what I hadn't: this house wasn't theirs. Hell, it was an abandoned house. No furniture, total mess, all ducked up. Before all that registered to me I was attacked. They beat the shit out of me. I barely remember any of it. I do remember being strapped into a gurney and hearing a paramedic say that my lung was punctured. Turns out he was wrong, but I was in enough pain to believe it. I spent the next few days in the hospital being treated for a variety of things, including a concussion that required them drilling a hole in my skull, broken ribs, a broken hand that never healed correctly, and of course heroin withdrawal. When the police spoke with me I refused to answer any questions until they asked me if I knew that my friend Mary had been assaulted as well. I remember feeling, and I still feel, the shame of realizing I had never even considered what happened to her. Turns out she had been violently raped while I was unconscious. They beat the hell out of her too. I think that's the first time I honestly felt guilt about what I'd been doing for nearly 2 years. Not even my sister getting arrested had been enough to make me realize what a ducking ass I was, but being shown the pictures of Mary's face, all swollen and bruised, made me cry like a girl. I told the police everything about my dealer friend and how he'd set up the date with Mary that night. But nothing ever came of it. The dealer kept his mouth shut, and even though they raided his home, they only found a little pot. No money, guns, or heavy drugs. He got a slap on the wrist. Yeah, I cleaned up after that. I've been drug-free for 5 years now. But Mary, last I heard, is still a heavy user. My sister got clean and is now in college, but she's had a string of abusive boyfriends, and I know that's probably my fault. I was her big brother and I taught her that men only want her for sex, and she's had a hard time unlearning that lesson. The other girls I barely even remember, and I am too much of a coward to try and track down.
I seduced and had sex with a teacher in senior year, and then blackmailed him into giving me good grades. I still feel terrible about this, even though I am in my late 30s and it's been so long ago. In high school, especially by senior year, I was sort of the popular goth edgy girl. I tried as hard as I possibly could to be a sort of 90s Angelina Jolie type femme fatale girl. I slept around, a lot. I tried to sleep with as many guys as I could my senior year. I was 18 to 19, held back a year, and so I was older and was legally able to sleep with older guys. I had this math teacher, who was really hot. Handsome, rough face with short curly hair and a stubble beard. He was new, he was youngish, I think like 28, and he was charming. He would always bike to work after going to the gym and would typically only wear a white t-shirt, which was usually coated in sweat when he got into the classroom, so it stuck to his body and it was basically see-through on some of the hotter days. I remember all the girls in the class would joke around about how you could see his muscles through his shirt on days when it was hot, and that we all prayed for hot weather just because of that. Right away I saw him as sort of a goal to get him to sleep with me. I flirted with him a lot, like just bluntly flirted with him when the class was over and it was typically only us in the classroom for a bit. He looked awkward as hell when I flirted with him, he didn't really know what to do. He was constantly looking out to see when the next class was coming, and because he didn't want anyone walking in on me flirting with him. Early on, I kissed him, but he sort of leaned back and rejected it afterwards. I just laughed and kept on flirting with him. Later on I kissed him again, maybe 4 weeks after, but this time he was a bit more receptive to it. I asked him if he wanted to meet me by the lake and he didn't really say anything, he just looked shocked, and I told him where it was and told him to meet me there. He said he knew about the area I was talking about, but he didn't say he was gonna go, he just looked dumbfounded. He didn't show. I waited a whole hour. I asked him again the next class, and we kissed again, and this time he did show. Looking back, I feel awful. I felt predatory kind of. He was my prey and I was the predator. He looked like he wanted to have sex but also looked incredibly uncomfortable at the idea of it. We had sex in the park and it was good, really good actually, but I felt like he deeply regretted it. I asked him again the next class if he wanted to do it again. He said he was busy and quickly left the classroom. A week later, I saw him in the parking lot and asked if he wanted to meet me back at my house, and that my parents weren't home. He came, and we had sex again at my house, this time in a bed, and he was there for hours. He warmed up and stopped being so uncomfortable at the idea of it. We had sex again 2 days later at my house. Eventually we stopped. But I still talked to him after class a lot, and I asked him about my grades and stuff, and I knew I wasn't doing good in the class. I never outright said it, but I implied that. Well, he should give me good grades because I slept with him. The day after he sort of just straight up told me, he can't give me good grades just because we had sex. This is the part I most regret, I told him, because we had sex, you have to give me good grades, and said how much trouble he could get in for having sex with me. I was implying that I would tell on him, if he didn't give me good grades. The worst part is that I tried to make myself seem like some seductress badass femme fatale girl when in my head I felt horribly insecure and felt terrible for him, while I was saying it. He sort of looked at me in horror and I kept up the act, but in my head all I wanted to do was tell him that I didn't mean what I said. I would have never actually told anyone about what we did. I really liked him, he was a nice, charming guy who was sweet and funny and wholesome. He gave me good grades. I got AA. I know I didn't deserve it. I barely even talked to him at all during the class after that. I still think about this all the time and feel so much regret over it. The way I seduced him and pressured him, The way I basically blackmailed him, the corny way I was trying to act like some femme fatale badass when I told him I was blackmailing him. Even though I really liked him, and the sex was great, none of it was worth it. It makes me feel horrible, all the time. Nothing bad ended up happening in the end. He would go on to be a professor at a college 2 years later, and I would go to NYC for college after taking a year off. I slept with my daughter's ex-boyfriend and he got me pregnant. They got back together and got married. This was back in, let me think, maybe 1997? I was 38 and my daughter was 18, and she was dating Harry, who was 24. I was an alcoholic and dabbled in other drugs, mostly cocaine. I was not a good person, let alone mother. Not like I was abusive to my daughter or anything, but I was generally inattentive and cared more about my alcohol and drugs than her, especially in her teen years. I am 14 years sober now. I disapproved of my daughter dating Harry, but I never told her why. He would flirt with me, constantly, and the age difference also creeped me out. Also, he was an alcoholic and drug user, just like me. She broke up with him over his alcoholism. Soon after she moved away, not too far, but regardless she didn't live with me anymore. Harry kept calling me and asking if we wanted to get drinks. I turned him down, but then one day he said he had a bunch of coke and I couldn't resist. He came over, we did the coke, and we ended up having sex. He was a very good-looking guy. He looked a lot like that ridiculous 80s Justin Bieber picture that was on the front page today. That is actually what made me think about him. For the next few months, maybe like 3 to 4 months, he would sometimes come over and we would have sex and do drugs and get drunk together. Any drug addict knows what that is like, to have a drug addict buddy in that way. Then I got pregnant. I knew it was by him. I had sex without a condom a few times stupidly. I never told him I was pregnant, and I went and got the abortion and kept it a secret. Anyways, I stopped seeing him after that. It was too weird. I also got sober, for like 4 months, before relapsing. Fast forward 2 years and my daughter contacts me and tells me that she got back with Harry, and that he is fully sober. I was mortified, honestly. He was gonna tell her that we slept together, and she is going to hate me for life. They came over one day and said hi, and when my daughter was gone, Harry told me that there is no reason to tell her about what happened. I agreed. It's been 16 years of marriage on their part. They have a kid together. Harry got cancer, then beat it. I got sober. That's basically it. I don't see them very often. They live in Texas and I live on the East Coast. But whenever I do, there is always that tension between me and Harry. It's literally the first thing that comes to either of our minds. I can just tell. Not like sexual tension, like why did we have to do that? What the duck is wrong with us? Kind of tension. I think about this often. Especially when I see my grandson. I always think that could have been my son if things had gone differently, but wow, what a disaster that would have been if I decided to keep that child.
I cheated, no sex, on my wife and I hate myself now. Background: I met my wife while I was in college, and I was a virgin then. She was my first, I was her second, and for some reason that always made me feel like I missed out sexually and felt the need to sleep with someone else. Also, during the first few months in which we were dating, she was still seeing her ex regularly and slept with him a couple of times. I had my suspicions at the time but didn't approach the subject because I was falling in love with her, and she quickly fell in love with me too and ended all contact with him. We had a fight a few years later and I called her out on it, which she felt awful about, and at that point I really didn't care that she had done it because I loved her so much and didn't care about the past. She is truly the best thing that has ever happened to me. We really complement each other well, and I honestly cannot function without her love, support, and daily presence. We got married last year, and have been together for 8 years. That all being said, I've always wondered what it would be like to experience intimacy with another person. A couple of weeks ago, she was visiting her parents for a few nights, and I was really horny. My wife and I have sex maybe once a week, so I tend to have a lot of sexual build-up. Instead of just rubbing one out like I usually do, I let the wrong brain and curiosity get the better of me and I used an online forum to connect with an older married woman online, and decided to meet her for drinks that evening. We met up, and while I was uncomfortable the whole time, I just wasn't sure what to do and I ended up bringing her back to our apartment, I think just to see how far I would take it. After about 10 minutes of her failed attempts to get things going for me with her hands, I said, "I'm sorry, I just can't do this. I love my wife too much," and she said, "Okay, I understand, that's fine. And don't feel bad, We didn't have sex or do anything. She was very understanding about my feelings, didn't push the issue at all, and asked if we could just sit and watch TV for a little while, so I sat with her and had casual conversation for about an hour, after which I politely told her I had work to do, and she left. I immediately felt disgusted, and for the last 2 weeks I have been hating myself and struggling with anxiety and what I think to be depression. What I absolutely do not want to have happen is for my wife to find out, because she doesn't deserve pain and I'd rather carry the burden of knowing this. I'm trying to learn from this. This incident made me realize that I absolutely do not need to have any sexual contact with anyone else. In fact, my wife and I had probably the best sex we had ever had about a week after this happened, and I also have reminded myself of how lucky I am to have such an amazing person in my life. I've gained an even deeper appreciation for what I have, and to make sure I do every damn thing I can moving forward to make my wife's life as amazing as possible. I don't want to throw away my entire future with this amazing woman because of a very stupid mistake that I made. What I'm really struggling with is the guilt, even though no sexual acts were performed, and I just want to know how to forgive myself for not being perfect, without confessing to her. If anyone has any recommendations on what to do, I would be so very appreciative. I just want to enjoy life again and put this all behind me.
I'm waiting for someone to die so I can get married. Backstory: my so's high school sweetheart, we'll call her Mary, and my so, let's call him Joe, have remained close friends even though they've not dated in 8 years. Joe and I had a huge fight and split a couple of months ago, but have since been working out our problems and are planning to marry. This is where Mary comes in. In the past year, Mary was diagnosed with a rare brain condition, was raped, which resulted in a pregnancy. She kept the baby and pressed charges on the rapist, and during the pregnancy she found out she had a serious fast-growing cancer. Her baby is now close to 4 months old. She also has a 3-year-old son. Neither child is with Joe, and she found out about a month ago that she is terminal. She's so far gone in the cancer that she only has a few weeks left to live and is now in home hospice care. As I said before, she and Joe are still very close friends, and after his first visit with her when she found out she was dying, her family begged him to make it seem to her that they are in a relationship because she felt ugly because of the cancer eating away at her body and alone and unloved. He agreed because he does still love her very much, if not in a romantic way. Their relationship consists of him driving up and spending a couple of days with her. She lives a couple of 100 miles away, once a week or so, and helping with household chores, meals, etc., and holding her hand while she hurts, trying to distract her from what's going on, and talking to her and comforting her. The last time he was there visiting, her brother brought an engagement ring for him to give to her as a promise to be with her until the end. Joe had serious misgivings about this, feeling as though he were putting on a front because he would not be with her in a relationship, let alone proposing, if not for the circumstances. He went ahead and did it at the urging of her family, but felt bad. Now, during the last month of all this, he and I have been working on our issues and getting along rather well, and discussing plans to marry soon, etc. But Mary is the elephant in the room. We recently took a huge vacation together, but I couldn't post anything about his part in it on Facebook for fear of Mary and her family finding out he is actually with someone else. We even discussed going to a beachside wedding chapel on the trip, but he didn't want to marry me while playing this part for her. I know that as soon as she passes we will move on, get married, I'll be able to post the rest of the stuff from our trip, etc., but it makes me feel morbid, like I'm waiting for this poor woman to snuff it so I can have my man back. A few notes: he has my blessing in all this. I know she's dying, has very limited time left, and I am fine with what he is doing. I know his engagement to her is making her happy and making her fight harder, giving her older child just a little more time with his mother before she passes and making her days a little less miserable. Update: my fiancé was planning to go visit Mary this weekend, probably for the last time, and kept putting it off. He had originally planned to go last weekend but hemmed and hawed and really didn't want to go because he has a lot going on with the remodel of his home, his school schedule, and the thought of seeing her wasting away was incredibly depressing to him. So this weekend rolls around and I encourage him to go up to see her Thursday after his last class, but he says no, it's fine, he'll come with me to a benefit auction for one of my cousins to meet a lot of my extended family. He got a call early Friday morning that Mary was going into the hospital and probably only had a day or two left, and still he chose to go to the event with me. As soon as he dropped me off he headed up to go see her, then didn't get 10 miles before her mother called and told him she'd passed. Now he's racked with guilt about putting off that last visit. He broke his promise to be with her when the end came and he's devastated. He isn't blaming me, but he is kicking himself for choosing to spend time with me instead of rushing to be by her side when her mother first called. I've told him, he is a Baptist and truly believes that she is in heaven and that she knows he was on his way when she passed, and that before she passed her mother told her he was on the way, so she knew he was trying to get there, and that's what matters. I told him she always understood that he had school, his kids, and other obligations, and that seeing her was difficult at best fairly often. I don't know what else to say or do to comfort him. I feel so useless right now. He's coming to pick me up for the night to keep him company, but I have to leave fairly early tomorrow because I have to shop for bridesmaid dresses for my brother's wedding. We're down to the wire, can't really put it off, and I have an appointment to shop for my own dress, which is making me feel like a selfish ass. I also feel relief that Mary and his promise to her no longer have to weigh in the back of my mind as I'm planning our wedding, and again that makes me feel bad. I'm not sure what I'm looking for here, just feel so lost.